the bug. These ugly, hive-minded monstrosities want one thing: the end of humanity. We need you to stop them.
Troopers on the ground, prepare to extract. Emergency. Arachnid threat no longer containable. An arachnid horde of indeterminate size is attacking.
No.
Starship Troopers Extermination is a game that I've covered a couple of times on this channel, with the first early access build back in 2023, along with the full retail release last year in October. I gave that early access build quite a lot of praise in my preview video. The so-called full game, however, kinda left me wanting as it felt unfinished and suffered from some really bad performance issues, even on the PlayStation 5. Since it's been a year since that full release and I haven't played much since then, I decided to jump back into it over the past few days to see what kind of state the game is in now. Cause despite my issues with the full release, this is a game that I've spent around 100 hours in collectively from the early access to now.
Now you've done it. You've made me turn my chair.
So, in case you're watching this and have never heard of this game, Starship Troopers Extermination is an online horde shooter based on the cult classic 1997 film Starship Troopers. You and 15 other players are dropped off in one of a few maps, where you have to run around collecting resources from various mining locations, and then fortify a base and protect it from an endless barrage of arachnid swarms, before exfiltrating out of the area at a designated drop spot at the end of the match. There are a couple of other game modes too, like Hive Hunt, which sees you trying to plant bombs inside of bug nests, along with a Horde mode, which sees you trying to survive 10 waves of increasingly more difficult assaults from the arachnids. The core gameplay loop of Extermination was never particularly groundbreaking, but what sold it and made those early builds of the game so much fun was the Starship Troopers license, and being able to experience these large-scale battles against hordes of bugs just like in the films. I was absolutely hooked when the Carnage update was released, that stopped corpses from disappearing and made them solid, which led to so many intense and emergent moments as the corpses would start piling up and bugs could actually use those piles to then climb over your base's defenses. Again, very similar to some of the film's more iconic moments. I mean, this was pretty damn impressive even if you weren't familiar with the films, I'd imagine. It was all shaping up to be a really solid game as it got close to release, with them even promising a solo campaign that would feature Casper Van Dien reprising his role from the films in the game.
Oh my god, you're Casper Van Dien from Starship Troopers.
Oh! No, why? No.
This campaign wound up being a little more than a glorified tutorial, however, set almost entirely in these boring interior locations that weren't very exciting, and aside from the last few missions being really poorly balanced, didn't do that good of a job of conveying what an actual match was like in terms of the scale of the maps and the size of the enemy hordes you'd face. The full game also suffered from rather glaring performance issues that shouldn't have still been affecting the experience at that point, especially when the game's price increased for the full launch. It also just felt quite lacking in content, with only like 4 maps on offer, and not even as many bugs as the original 2005 Starship Troopers game that I also covered here a few years ago. Like, where are the flying bugs? I also still haven't seen a tanker bug even once, but apparently they only spawn in certain game modes.
I'm devastated.
But even despite this disappointing full launch, I did end up sinking another 30 odd hours into the game playing it on PS5, and relishing in the sights that the Carnage mode would create, with hundreds upon hundreds of corpses being left in my team's wake throughout matches. So coming back to the game several months later, there is some new content available, primarily in the form of a new map set on an overrun space station, and a handful of new single-player missions that are almost kind of fun. They feel less like tutorials with varying objectives like fixing generators and rescuing and then protecting lost soldiers across the station, while fighting decent-sized hordes of bugs. But then I couldn't get past the 4th mission because the game would spawn in a bunch of the exploding drone bugs that would always kill the soldiers I was trying to rescue. And since none of these missions have fucking checkpoints, I gave up trying to finish these missions. How are we in the year 2025 playing single-player campaigns that don't offer any form of mid-mission saving or checkpoints? I mean, come on.
Alright, cut! Where's the director? I can't work like this.
It was when I jumped back into the multiplayer mode, which is really the core intended experience of the game, when I started to notice what had really changed since I last played it several months ago. And it's not just the longer connection times. Fundamentally, not a lot has changed with the mechanics and the gameplay. There are a few new optional objectives like destroying bug holes of explosives, and the issues with the game's technical performance seems to have been addressed, at least on PlayStation 5. The game that I really enjoyed is still here. It's just that the player base has now ruined that Starship Troopers feeling that it used to have. Let me explain. In the earlier builds, there were only 3 player classes, and it was pretty well balanced, even if the weapon roster made them all feel a tad interchangeable. The weapons mainly consisted of assault rifle variants, based off weapons from the film, with things like grenade launchers and RPGs being random chance weapons that could spawn in matches, and only a couple of players could acquire them, basically a first in, first served setup. This meant that everyone was using rifles, guns that fired bullets, which combined with the carnage update that made corpses permanent, made the game feel very true to the movie, with all the corpses piling up everywhere and creating lots of emergent moments of players trying to destroy the piles of corpses to prevent the bugs from scaling over the base defenses. Well, now there are 6 classes, and one of them is an explosive weapons class called the demolisher, with the starting weapon being the fucking grenade launcher, which basically gives all enemies and creates an obscene amount of particle effects on impact. The starting weapon of this class is a grenade launcher. A grenade launcher in a horde shooter. Do I have to explain how badly this trivializes combat? Because the current player base has worked this out and almost everyone is playing as this class now, negating any real threat the hordes of bugs once posed, as they're all blown to pieces before they get even within spitting range of the base most of the time. And then when you're not protecting the base and just trying to complete objectives across the map, whenever combat happens it becomes almost impossible to see anything because everyone is firing grenades everywhere, kicking up particle effects all over the fucking screen so you can barely see anything. This also renders the whole carnage system practically useless now too, because all the players are using explosives to destroy the corpses and nerfing any sense of challenge to the matches, which, in my humble opinion, has sapped the game of the fun that it used to have. Before, it felt like the movies, being on the edge of being overwhelmed by these terrifying arachnids breaking into your base, hoping like hell you could take down the ones charging at you before you needed to reload. I mean, there's a reason why the original Left 4 Dead didn't have explosive weapons, because it would negate the fun if every player could use a grenade launcher to nerf a horde 20 feet away, or bring down a tank in less than 5 seconds. Like, if you want to have explosive weapons in the game, sure, that's fine, but at the very least, make the players actually have to work for them. Start the demolition class off with a shotgun maybe, not a fucking grenade launcher. It just makes me sad that the experience of this game has been reduced to this. A bunch of players essentially camping with explosive weapons, racking up insanely high kill counts.
Alright, cut! Where's the director? I can't work like this.
Because during the early access days, I was in love with this game. I'd never sunk 50 plus hours into an early access game, especially a multiplayer game. But back then, it felt like the makings of a great Starship Troopers game, especially since the only other shooter we'd had for this franchise was back in 2005. And that game hasn't aged well either. But honestly, I think I'll be going back to that game well before I consider reinstalling Extermination again.
Would you like to know more?